From his expression, it seemed as if his right eye was throbbing, as if it was in an overwhelming amount of pain. Tian instantly sprung forward. "Are you okay?" he asked. The corner of Ho Chang's mouth twitched, but he forced the words back. The silver eye engraved on Ming's hilt snapped open, and the eyeball started to spin wildly. Veins popped along the surface of the hand that Ho Chang rested on top of the altar, that hand threatening to flip the table at any second. Tian reached out his hand, wanting to help, but Ho Chang growled, "Stay back." Seeing Tian freeze, Ho Chang said through gritted teeth, "Your Highness, please, hurry and get away from me. I might." But Tian cut him off. "How can you tell me to leave when you're like this?" Ho Chang said, his voice nothing but gentle, "If you were to stay here any longer, In that instant, wave after wave of ghostly howls and cries sounded from outside Chendeng Temple. Ghosts were doubling over on the ghost city main street, bawling their eyes out, clutching their heads and wailing, as if their skulls had been split open and they were on the verge of death. Amidst the chaos, Chirong was sprinting quickly away. Although the flesh vessel had diminished his powers, his possession of a human body also acted as a protective barrier against any ghost-effective attacks. It was solely because of this fact that Chirong was still jumping about resiliently and seizing the chance to flee. The group of female ghosts that had been cradling Guzi had now fallen onto the ground, crying about their headaches, unable to sing their hypnotic melody. Guzi groggily woke up, only to see Chirong bolting away like a madman. He jumped to his feet and chased after him, while yelling, "Dad! Dad! Wait for me!" As he ran, Chirong turned around, stuck out his tongue, and made a face. "Good boy," he shouted, "Dad's leaving." And he laughed wildly. Yet, Guzi still relentlessly chased after him with his two small legs. Seeing that the distance between them had grown bigger, he burst out in tears, and he shouted, "Dad, please don't throw me away. Dad, take me with you." Chirong spat out continuously, Get lost, don't follow me. What a nuisance." A drop of his spit flew so far that it hit Guzi on the forehead and knocked him down onto his butt. He cried even harder, as if his heart was going to break and his lungs were going to burst. Tian couldn't bear it any longer, and he stormed out of Chendeng Temple in anger. "Chirong!" he cried. The moment that Chirong saw Tian blocking the path in front of him, he spun around in fear and ran back the way he came from. Along the way, he scooped up Guzi from the ground and threatened, "Don't come any closer. Come, and I'll bite off the head of this little brat before your eyes." "What a good boy. You're going to become your dad's meal. How filial. Tomorrow, Dad'll cook you. You can pick between being braised or steamed." He laughed crazily. Tian wasn't fazed by the threat at all. However, just when he was about to give chase, a loud crash sounded from behind him. As if suddenly struck by fury, Ho Chang had swept the ink brush and paper pad off the table and onto the ground. Fearing the worst, Tian couldn't afford to deal with Chirong and turned around. "Sun Lang," he said. All of a sudden, he was embraced tightly by Ho Chang. There was a tremble in his voice as the Supreme Ghost King whispered, "I lied. Don't leave me." Tian became as still as a statue, locked within that pair of strong arms. "Sanlang," he asked, "do you recognize me?" It seemed as if he was at a point where he had lost all his senses and wasn't able to recognize who was in front of him. He clutched Shelian even tighter in his arms and repeatedly muttered, "I lied. Don't leave me." Shelian widened his eyes. Outside the temple, while Guzi wailed uncontrollably, Chirong broke out in hysterical laughter. He cackled, "Hua Chang, you f***er. That'll teach you to look down on me all the time. Look at you, all cocky all day. Ain't this karma? You're done for." Upon hearing this, the ghosts on the streets, who were on the verge of exhaustion from the pain, immediately cursed back. "Green ghost, you piece of useless trash, you dare to swear at our Lord?" The annoying ruckus going on around them drove Hua Chang to the edge, making him even more infuriated. He raised his hand as if about to blast them to pieces. Instinctively, Shelian hugged him back to keep the hand down. He soothed, Okay. I won't leave. I won't leave you." With a flick of his hand, Chendeng Temple's grand doors shut by themselves. To prevent Chirong from bursting into the temple under these circumstances, Shelian shooed him away. "If you're gonna scram, then get lost. I don't have time for you. If you don't get lost, then just wait and see what I'll... To his surprise, Hua Chang was unsatisfied with only a shallow embrace, and he shoved Shelian roughly on top of the jaded table. Ink, paper, brushes, all fell and scattered across the floor. Caught up in the struggle, Shelian's hand accidentally glided past the ink pad stationed on the table, leaving crimson marks along the paper underneath him. Upon ache of separation, upon the line, "No cloud is beautiful but that which crowns the peak," the two characters of the peak were now stained with vivid blood-like markings, a stunningly beautiful addition. "Son," Shelian started to say, but before he could finish, Hua Chang held him by the shoulders and leaned down to kiss him. Chirong, who had undoubtedly heard something that didn't sound right, laughed and said, "Cousin Crown Prince, you'd better be careful. Hua Chang is probably like a rabid dog right now. He'll bite whoever he sees. I myself will personally go and help you spread the news. There are quite a few monks and cultivators who seek revenge against Hua Chang. They might as well come now and take care of him." He laughed maniacally. Shelian's heart tightened as Chirong's laughter faded into the distance. If Chirong really did call forth a group of cultivators who Hua Chang had wronged, under the ghost's current, weakened condition, how could Ghost City defend itself? Yet, amidst all this, Hua Chang wasn't allowing him any break to think. Although he wasn't alive and shouldn't emit any warmth, in this very moment, his body was burning hot, as if he was struck by a high fever. With their lips tightly pressed against each other's, Shelian was practically forced to accept the incoming waves of heat. The hands that were originally trying to push Hua Chang away now sank into the folds of the red fabric near his shoulders instead. Maybe it was because Hua Chang's spiritual energy was too strong. Shelian felt his throat, chest, and stomach were filled to the brim by warmth, to the point that it became uncomfortable. If he continued to endure this, he might just burst under the sheer amount of power that was being poured in. He tightened his jaw and raised his palm to slap. Although he did land a blow, but because he really couldn't bring himself to hit Hua Chang, the hand only tapped on his shoulder instead. The force neither light nor heavy. Unfazed, Huacheng seized his wrist, held it down, and continued the attack on Xie Lian's lips. He really couldn't let this continue any further. This time, Xie Lian used both of his hands. After shoving Huacheng away, he fled to the side of the altar in panic, panting for breath. However, with bloodshot eyes, Huacheng hounded him and followed him over, pressing him against the altar. Xie Lian cried, "San Lang!" Perhaps his voice did reach him, for Huacheng stared at his face for a long time before suddenly wrapping him in a bone-crushing hug. Seeing that he had regained some sense and stopped his advances, Xie Lian let out a sigh of relief. However, as he stood in Huacheng's embrace, he felt the unsettling energy inside of the Supreme, fighting to break out. No wonder Huacheng had kissed him the moment he caught him. With such chaos going on internally, he had to find an outlet to expel it. In order to fully return him to his normal state, blood must be drained. However, Huacheng wasn't alive. How would he have any blood to let? After a moment of consideration, Xie Lian came to a conclusion. "Forgive me," he said. Then he cupped Huacheng's face and voluntarily covered the other's lips with his own, gently guiding the turbulent flow of heat into his own body, helping to ease the pain and suffering. Instinctively, Huacheng looped his arm around Xie Lian's waist, making Xie Lian shiver ever so slightly. In the next second, the two were tumbling on top of the altar. It really wasn't fair. Xie Lian wouldn't dare to touch anywhere on Huacheng that was even slightly dangerous. Yet, because of his cloudy state of mind, Huacheng's fingers were roaming across every inch of his body shamelessly, making Xie Lian suffer in silent torment. This altar was originally a place where one would make offerings to a god, but upon it now were a ghost and a god who were entangled in a heated battle of tongues. Although preposterous, the scene was beyond breathtaking. In the past, when committing this sort of act, both parties were more or less clear-headed, and there was always a justifiable reason. There was at least some measure of control, since there was nothing beyond just lips covering lips. However, this time, with roaming hands on top of a hazy state of mind, it well exceeded the boundary of only lips and teeth. In his foggy mind, Xie Lian finally realized something. Although every time it was out of his control and he had no choice, in truth, every time there was a hidden desire that he couldn't hold back. After suffering through the entire night, the unsettled energy inside of Huacheng finally began to calm down. The arm that was clutching onto Xie Lian slowly released its grip. Xie Lian flipped over and sat up. Watching Huacheng's sleeping face, he finally sighed a breath. Thrown to the side, a Ming's single eyeball was still spinning around frantically. Xie Lian picked up the scimitar, and it was only after a long series of pets that the blade finally softened into a crescent eye smile, as if it was finally satisfied. Not long after, Huacheng shot up from where he had been sleeping. "Your Highness," he called. Hastily, Xie Lian adjusted his expression. He turned around and beamed. "You're awake? Everything's fine now," he said. Huacheng did a quick scan around him. Needless to say, it was a giant mess inside Qiandong Temple. His face was uncharacteristically distraught, as if he couldn't remember what happened the night before. Xie Lian jumped at the chance to speak, his voice calm and confident. what happened last night. All your subordinates were suddenly struck by either fever or throbbing headaches. Everyone was restless. You were too, and you had quite the temper. Hua Cheng demanded. Other than that? Other than what? There's nothing else, Xie Lian said, and blinked. He could feel Hua Cheng's gaze on him as the Supreme continued to grill him. Was there really nothing? He asked. Then how did I calm down? Xie Lian softly cleared his throat as if he was slightly embarrassed. To tell you the truth, San Lang, please don't be mad at me. Other than doing this, he motioned at Ming, who he was currently petting, and admitted, I also had a fight with you. He coughed. Hua Cheng looked at him suspiciously. We fought? He asked. Xie Lian held down this fort and watched him earnestly. That's right, he said. Look, the hall is such a mess because of our fight. There was a pause before Hua Cheng puffed a sigh of relief and rested his head on his hand. Seeing that he wasn't hounding for answers anymore, Xie Lian finally felt his suspended heart settle down and silently released his breath. All of a sudden, Hua Cheng muttered. It opened. What did? Xie Lian asked. Hua Cheng lifted his head and with a somber voice, he clarified. Mount Tonglu has reopened. The meaning of this announcement couldn't be clearer for the two. Xie Lian widened his eyes and asked, a new ghost king is about to be born? When Xie Lian returned to report in, the heavenly court was also rumbling with thunder unceasingly. Stepping into the great martial hall, Xie Lian unconsciously looked for someone to inquire, what's the matter with Lord Thundermaster? But only when the words left his lips did he realize that the spot where the Windmaster once stood was now empty. The Watermaster, who stood right up front, and the Earthmaster, who sat in the corner, those spots too were vacant. He was taken aback, and his heart sighed. He looked over and saw Lang Chengchou enter the hall. Having not seen him for so long, his entire person had thinned in size, looking much gloomier. His eyes met with Xie Lian's, then he turned away without a word. Xie Lian scanned around and realized that he couldn't find anyone he could converse with casually. A voice answered him. It's nothing. A ghost king is about to be born. Ghosts cry and gods sound. The thunder will not stop. The one who had responded was Feng Xin. For some reason, when Xie Lian saw him, he couldn't help but feel an incredible sense of friendliness. However, one of Feng Xin's eyes was purple. Xie Lian couldn't help but glance over to Mu Qing, who was standing far away on the other side of the hall. Mu Qing's cheek was swollen. It seemed that after building their grudge for so many years, the brawl the last time must have been aggressive. Junwu spoke up. The reason why I've summoned everyone here today, I'm sure you're all very aware. The heavenly officials all acknowledged. Junwu continued slowly. The universe is a kiln. All sentient beings are copper. In the deep waters and scalding fires, all trials breathe within. Mount Tonglu is a natural, ominous land crawling with malicious tidings. A live volcano that can erupt at any given time. Every few hundred years, the city of Gu within the mountain will open its gates and affect millions of ghosts. It especially affects the previous ghost kings. Every monster, demon, and ghost that thirsts to reach the level of supreme will make their way to Mount Tonglu. Once they have gathered, Mount Tonglu will be sealed once more, and the slaughtering will officially begin. When there is but one last one remaining, a new ghost king will be born. The crimson rain, sword flower, and ship sinking black water are both such supreme ghost kings who were born thus. The two became supremes and emerged from the mountain. Blackwater spent 12 years there, and Huacheng spent 10 years. Mujing said coldly, "One Blackwater and one Huacheng is already difficult to deal with. Just see what they've done. If another one comes along, we won't sleep a wink." Xie commented gently, "General Xuanzhen, I won't comment on what Blackwater has done, but Huacheng hasn't done anything really out of line." Muqing, with his puffy lips, swollen cheeks, gave him a look. Pei Ming spoke up. "They are quite difficult to deal with, so we must stop this gathering of millions of ghosts. Am I right?" "That's correct," Junwu said. "The gathering of the millions of ghosts will take a few months. We will need to stop them before they have gathered." "What if we don't stop them in time? Is there any way to rally?" Xie asked. "There is," Junwu responded. "However, hopefully we will not reach that step. The most urgent business right now is that the arousal of ghosts has started a wave of chaos, and many monsters and demons that were sealed away have escaped. Many of these are extremely dangerous inhuman creatures, such as the female ghost Xuanji, the fetus spirit, the brocade immortal. At this moment, they must all be rushing toward Mount Tonglu. They must be immediately apprehended once more." "They've all escaped?" Xie asked. "Then this is certainly quite chaotic. Which is why I'm afraid every martial guard must take heed and thoroughly investigate their warranted domains," Junwu said. "Then what about me?" Xie asked. Although Xie was a god of rubbish at the moment, nevertheless he still ascended as a martial god the last 2 times. He was basically being used as a martial god right now too. The only difference was that he didn't have a domain. Humming for a moment, Junwu said, "Shenle, why don't you go with Qi Ying?"